Thank you and good evening and welcome to the latest edition of the Joy Chip Reading Project. I'm your host, James Edward Mills, and today I'm pleased and not, if not thrilled, to greet our wonderful guest today, this month's author, Betty Reid Soskin, who is the author of the book, Sign My Name to Freedom. And I'm going to go ahead and continue to let people into the room as we are gathering today. I look forward to a great discussion, but before we dive into the conversation, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm screaming to you today from Madison, Wisconsin, which is the ancestral homeland of the Ho-Chunk people, a place known for time immemorial as Dejope. So please, wherever you are in North or South America, please take a moment to recognize the Native people that once where you live now, once they called home. I'd also like to thank very much the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for their support in this and other online discussions hosted by the Joy Chip Project, as well as the financial contributions of the Schleck Family Foundation, the National Geographic Society, and the National Park Service. They provide us with a small stipend so that we can provide a little bit of money for the people who meet with us every month, because I believe that friends should never let friends work for free. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Joy Chip Project, I'm a freelance journalist and independent media producer, and I also have a specialty in outdoor recreation, environmental conservation, acts of charitable giving, and practices of sustainable living. I also teach a course at the Nelson Institute called Outdoors for All, and it's an undergraduate studies course on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the management of public land. And many of the authors on the Joy Chip Reading Project are the part of the reading list of the materials that I share with our students. And we also want to talk about how the African American and person of color experiences impacts our relationship with the natural world through memoir and academic research. And I'm really excited to introduce our guest today. In addition to her long career with the National Park Service, Betty Reid Soskins is an American civil rights activist, a historian, and author. She's best known for her contributions at the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historic Park in Richmond, California. She was born on September 22nd, 1921. Her transformative journey with the Park Service began at the great age of 80 when she took on the role as National Park Ranger, a position she held for until she retired at the age of 100. I'm really excited to be able to have this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to welcome and introduce to you National Park Ranger Betty Reid Soskin. Betty, how are you today?
Fine.
It is so good to see you. It's been way too long since we've had a chance to talk. First of all, I'd be really interested to know, what are you doing with yourself these days? Are you enjoying your retirement?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that maybe I would enjoy it better if I had gone and found the time in small increments. Then I would maybe have gotten so that being retired would mean something to me, but it really doesn't. I'm sort of waiting around to die.
Well, I can tell you that you've made some major contributions to our overall understanding of our national parks and also the history of our nation. As it happens, I mean, you are. I'm hoping to be able to wish you a very happy birthday about a month in advance. Next year, you're going to be 102.
Yes, I will.
Um,
I will be at that point, even with my great grandmother who lived to be 102.
Absolutely. And your grandmother, and forgive me, I'm going to mispronounce her name. Is it Laurinette or Allen?
No, she was Leontine Allen.
Leontine. Thank you. I badly pronounced that. What does it mean to you to live to the age of a person that you knew personally that was born into slavery?
I think I came to appreciate that as I grew older. I couldn't have ever guessed that when I was very young. But now I know that my great grandmother, who was born in 1846 and lived to be 102, dying in 1948. My mother, who my great grandmother raised, was born in 1894 and lived to be 101. She died in 1995. And I'm here still. And now I appreciate the fact that those three lives encompass so much of what we are as a nation, that all of that stuff, all of it, all of the things that I read in school, all the things that I worried about being a part of, that moved me in the 70s and the 80s, that took me through the assassinations that we experienced. All of that happened within the lifetime of three women who knew each other because we were all adults at the same time. I think that is absolutely wonderful. And now that I'm the last one, and my granddaughter Aldiana will follow me, that 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 is so special.
I think one of the things that makes your story so compelling is the fact that you lived through much of the history that we're all experiencing today. And much of what you experienced through the 1960s, the 50s, even all the way back to the 40s during the World War II era, how important is it for you to be able to share your personal experiences with people today?
It's terribly important. I don't know whether the people who are living today appreciate it, but I know that I appreciate it. That I feel as if I'm a gift that was given to them. I just don't know. I just don't know.
Well, I can tell you that I definitely think that you indeed are a gift to all of us, because your lived experiences are helping us to better understand what was going on during these tumultuous periods during the 1940s.
Hmm.
One of the things that really impressed me with regard to things that you've said in the past was that you see American history as cyclical, in that
Yes,
we have seen these moments of chaos time and time again.
yes. And
What can we learn from those moments of time?
I think that each time we go through one of these periods, and we've been going through them at least since 1776, that's it. That's when my history starts. But it's like 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 a spiral. We keep going through at higher and higher levels the same kinds of things, and each time we learn something from them. so that by now I have lived through so many cycles that I think that the time for me to go is not too far off.
Can you give us an idea as to what we need to learn with each cycle? Because I think that we have these recurring histories, where we see moments of chaos, but then recovery. What is the most important thing that we need or should learn from these moments in time?
Learn to forgive. That's the most important thing, I think. I think that learning to forgive is so much. I'm not sure how much of that is ever lived through, because we keep having to do it over and over again.
One of the things that is happening right now is that we're having a failure to learn history. In fact, there's legislation that's being passed to prevent certain history to being taught, specifically African American history.
Yes, that's happening in the South, and that's happening, I think, regretfully, because we really need to learn those lessons. And we're changing history by not going through those lessons. I'm not making sense anymore.
Well, I think you're making more sense than you realize, because the lessons that we're not learning are dooming us to repeat them.
Yes, we do. And I don't know.
I think one of the things that is most, I think, exciting and inspiring about the history that you've been able to share is that you have shown us that we can get through these things.
Yes.
We successfully made it through the First World War, the Second World War. And when we first met, you told us that we could get through this too. Do you still have that same sense of optimism?
I'm not sure. I used to be sure of lots of things, and now I'm not sure anymore. I wonder what happened.
Favorite TV show, Donald Trump.
Huh?
Your favorite TV show, Donald Trump.
My daughter says I've been watching too much Donald Trump. And I think that's true.
Well, I hope that the circumstances aren't causing you to despair, because I mean, I'm personally inspired by the young people that are, I think, learning a lot from the experience of the many things that you've been able to teach us over the last several years. Do you find a sense of optimism in young people like your granddaughter, who was the one who was kind enough to reach out to me to encourage this conversation?
Yes, I do. I really do. I have a lot of faith in the young people. I have so much more than I do. I think that there's some place that we have skipped somewhere along the line.
I really think that the
know,
young people that are beginning careers in the National Park Service and other interpretive roles with American history are taking the time to hopefully, create circumstances that are going to be better for everyone. What are the words of perhaps, you've given us a lot of wisdom, but I mean, if you're going to encourage a young person with regard to their interest in having a career in the National Park Service as an interpretive ranger as you have, what would you suggest to them?
I wish I knew that. I wish I could tell people what they ought to know. And I don't think that that's possible. I think that we all have to find our way. That's really important. That we have to find our way, and there are no shortcuts. I can't do it for them, and they can't do it for others. We've got to do it for ourselves.
Tell their own stories.
And you've got to tell your own stories. You've got to.
Also on the line is my friend and colleague, Shelton Johnson. Shelton, I'm glad that you're able to join us today. Can you unmute your microphone for a second? I'd love to chat with you about your thoughts regarding the history as interpreted by the National Park Service, and hopefully be able to share some of the narratives that are so important that Betty has helped us to start.
There, how's that? Can you hear me?
That's perfect. I can.
Yeah.
So everyone
right,
who is not familiar with my good friend Shelton Johnson, he's the author of the book Glory Land. He is an interpretive ranger at Yosemite National Park. And like Betty Soskins, tells wonderful stories about the Black American experience as interpreted through our national parks. Shelton, why is it important to you to be able to tell these important narratives?
Well, it's important because whenever you move forward physically, you have to push backwards. And in order to push backwards, you have to have something that's resisting that effort, something that holds you and pushes you forward. And that's what history is. It gives us a solid foundation beneath our feet to move forward as an individual, as part of a society, and as part of a species as well. And that's the value of history. But I think that also when we, have this conversation with Betty, we're looking at how history interfaces with personal memory and memoir. And so for Betty, history is a memory. It's a series of memories going back to her first conscious thought of who I am, who am I, what role do I play in this society? Who are these people around me that are my family? What does family actually mean? How is one connected to the other? So it's a very visceral connection that often history does not have in the formal sense, because it's the written word. There's a big difference between someone telling you a story of the ancestors, and they're telling it to you and looking at you, and you can see their eyes and you can hold their hands as they're telling that story. It's another thing when you open up a book and someone that you will never meet is telling that same story. So I think that when I look at history and I think about Betty and her life, I see the difference between history and memory, and they share some of the same DNA, but one is a little bit literally more active than the other. One is more alive than the other. And I think that's what's powerful about hearing Betty's story as Betty's telling that story, is that it's that memoir, it's that sense of awakening and opening up a door to a past that she has lived. And she can slip in and out of that space and that time and allow us to come with her. And that just has a provocative quality to it that books don't necessarily, actually books can never have, because there's just that abstract tangible. It's both abstract and tangible at the same time. You're reading something that's connecting you, but at the same time, it's disconnected from you because you close the book and the narrative ends. But in your life, the narrative begins when you're born and it doesn't end until you pass on. So there's some definite differences and similarities that tie both together.
Yeah, thank you for that. And frankly, I mean, I specifically asked Shelton to be on the call today because his ability to interpret history in a very profound way through memoir and story is what I believe that Betty has done through her book. Hopefully, everybody did the reading today, and you've had a chance to actually read the words that Betty has written through her book, Sign My Name to Freedom, because it's a long narrative thread that gives us her first person impression of critical real world events that happened through her lifetime. And when we stop and think about what will happen if we fail to recognize the things that happened in the ways that they happened to certain people, we'll lose that history and it'll be completely misinterpreted. Betty, one of the things that I really loved about your book and the conversation that you were having about the Rosie the Riveter National Historic Site and the World War II home front demonstrations in Richmond, they weren't telling the Black American history story.
Yeah.
Can you tell us just a little bit about how you helped to fix that? Because I think you were pivotal in making sure that we didn't just tell the story of the white Rosie the Riveters, we told the story of all Black Americans who were part of the home front initiative in World War II.
Yes, that's true. Because I guess I was about, oh goodness, 80 years old, I suppose, when I came to work for the parks. I didn't realize at the time, because I was not looking to become a ranger. I really was I was acting as a field representative for a member of the California State Assembly. And the park came into the area where I was responsible for it. And I began to meet with the people who were planning the park without feeling a part of them. I think that freed me, because it meant that I didn't have, I wasn't trying to be anything, but I wanted them to know the park was so much bigger than what they were planning. There was not only the park that was supposed to become the home for the women who were taking the place of the men who had gone overseas, but it was also the story of 120,000 Japanese who were interned, who lost 2.5 to 4 years of their lives and much of their treasure simply because they looked like the enemy. It's also the story of the bombing, not the bombing, but the explosion in Port Chicago, for 220 men lost their lives. In an explosion that took out 2 Kaiser ships. It was true that the women were important to the war effort, because having the women, the white women, who had worked in the parks, had made it possible for Henry Kaiser to complete 747 ships in a 4-year period. I don't think that we have ever really come to terms with what Henry Kaiser did for all of us.
Well, if you read the book, one of the things that you point out is that almost 90,000 Black Americans came to the San Francisco Bay Area from the South in order to build ships for the Second World War. I grew up in California. I did not know that.
You didn't?
And I honestly believe that if it were not for you, none of us would know that.
Really? That surprised me, because there were 14 ships building, 14 shipyards around the bay. Ken Kaiser had 4 of them. We accounted for most of the ships that were used in World War II.
Well, and what's interesting is that most of the labor were people of color. A lot of the hard work that was doing to create these ships were people that we don't always talk about. And
No,
thanks to you, this exhibit now tells that story. And I think it's mainly because you were there when it happened.
I was there when it happened, and I think I accounted for most of it, because I became so involved over time. That I think that maybe my memory accounts for most of what's happened at the Rosie shipyards. Deb Holland, who is the current
Secretary of Interior.
Secretary of Interior,
So she was also able to share the importance of the story of why we can't just tell one side of any history, because there are people that are remembering. And there's this great quote in your book that basically suggests that history is a factor of who is in the room doing the remembering.
Yes, that's true. And I was in the room along with all of the planners.
How old were the planners that were in there?
And the planners were mostly young people.
So they didn't have any.
And they
history was there.
No, they had no idea what they were planning to do a park that would pay homage to the women who worked for the men for the war effort. But there was so much more to the story, and it was so enriching.
You were able to identify those other
And
stories.
I was able to identify all those other stories.
So it became not an homage to the Rosies, but the story about the history about the home.
Yes.
Everyone's contribution.
Yes.
So we have now a much more complete understanding of the home front experience. And again, it's because of the memory of a single person who lived through it. And I think that really speaks to why it's so important that we tell and revere these very important narratives of people like you who are there to witness it.
But James, sorry, my name is Deora and I'm Betty's daughter. I'm going to butt in. You also have to remember that my mother is 101. And when she was a young girl, she was not told to speak up. She was told to be quiet, don't share your trauma to anybody. So at the age of 85, for her to go in the room and say, hey, here's the truth. This is what really happened that hasn't been, washed away. And for my mother, I mean, women of color were always outside of the home working, not just at home taking kids, carry kids and being housewives. Rosie the Riveters came out of the home and took up work in the shipyards. women of color have always been doing that. It's always taken two to make ends meet for a family of color. So it was a monumental lift for my mother to do this at that time from the socialization that she'd gotten. Remember, she was born in 1921. I mean, goodness, we didn't pass anti-lynching laws until what, 2 years ago?
Jared, thank you so much for that. And truthfully, to be able to come to this at the stage in life that you were in the time when the exhibits were first being created, that just speaks to your strength of character and your passion for these important topics. And it's only through our ability to tell these stories from these perspectives that we're ultimately going to be able to have solid narratives that we can share into the future. And I'm really excited about the prospects of a new generation of young people that will ultimately come to tell a much more comprehensive story of our history. And with that, I want to introduce to you a guest who's on the call today. Casey, I'm going to completely mispronounce your name. It's Trahanas. She is based at the Lewis and Clark National National Historic Trail in Omaha, Nebraska. Can you tell us, Casey, just a little bit about what it means to you as a young person in your second or third year as a National Park Ranger to tell these important stories?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Cassie Trahanas, and I'm a park ranger over at the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail in Omaha, Nebraska. And what it means to me to be able to be a park ranger and to see inspirational women like Betty, it's really, really motivating to continue to inspire other generations to continue this profession and to continue teaching people stories in various professions, whether you're an educator or an inspirational speaker at that. And just seeing you and hearing you speak, it's been so moving for me to be able to have someone wonderful like you to look up to and to learn from. You're so intelligent and so inspiring, and I just want to say thank you. I'm learning and growing, and it's really great to be able to have an inspiration like Betty in the picture for women of color, especially in the park ranger profession. So thank you, Betty.
I thank you. I have a feeling that I'm simply not myself, and I'm all the ideas are backing up, and they're lining up in my head, and I can't get them out because of the stroke.
Why don't you share, Mother, why don't you share with them what it meant for you to wear the uniform?
Oh, yes, that was something. The day that I put on the uniform for the first time and saw myself wearing the blue and the gray and whatever it is.
Green.
Gray and green. I walked into Macy's and got into the elevator, and there was a little girl with her mother, and she looked at me.
What color was she?
She was black. She looked at me and she looked at her mother. And that little girl had such a look of pride on her face that I knew that I would never, ever go out without my uniform. And then another day, I was standing in the checkout line at the local Safeway store. And as I moved in the line to pay pay for my purchases. A young woman who was standing beside me and was also Black looked over and said, "Do you work at the prison?" And I realized that that girl's only reference was to a prison. And I knew then that as I was on the street or walking in to any place, that every little girl and boy of color would see themselves with a choice that they didn't know they had. And I always wore my uniform because my uniform made that statement.
Oh, Betty, thank you for that. Casey, one of the things that I've really loved about the work that they're doing at Lewis and Clark is telling the story of York. You know, and not very many people know that the Lewis and Clark expedition was pivotal on the contributions of a enslaved Black American who literally helped this very early 1803 expedition from St. Louis, Missouri to the state of Oregon. Why is it important to be able to tell those kinds of stories at an interpretive park like Lewis and Clark?
I think it's important to tell those stories because, you know, the Lewis and Clark expedition, when we're taught about it in U.S. history, very often they're focusing on Lewis and Clark, who don't necessarily represent the nation as a whole, the diverse nation we are today. And so being able to recognize those other voices, such as York and Sacagawea, is incredibly important because that's what represents who we are today, a diverse nation, right? And so our junior ranger program is out of this world. It focuses on some of those other members of the expedition, such as York, such as Sacagawea, and really amplifies their voices. And that's something that's incredibly important to us.
Well, thank you for that. I think that we often don't even realize the number of historic characters that we don't know until someone takes the time to tell us. And that's one of the great roles that the National Park Service provides. Shelton, I want to swing back over to you because I mean that's one of the things that even put Black history on the radar for me when it comes to our national parks. You tell the story of the Buffalo Soldiers and the role that they played in the creation of Yosemite, as well as the national park system in general. What can you tell us about your role as an interpreter and why is it important to tell these untold stories?
I think it's important primarily because you want to have the fullness of who we are as human beings and who we were as human beings here in the United States. You want to have the fullness of that story communicated. You want to have it amplified. You want people to be able to see, to hear, to literally taste the past in the sense that it is something to be savored, the bitter and the sweet. And the history of the Buffalo Soldiers serving in Yosemite and Sequoia, the Presidio of San Francisco, Hawaii volcanoes, Glacier National Park, even with the 25th Infantry Bicycle Corps riding, to and through Yellowstone National Park. All those stories are important. So I kind of look at it as a tapestry. And a tapestry has all these different colored threads woven in. And as soon as you try to separate one thread from the whole thing can unravel. And I think the job of a historian is to make certain that each of those threads is illuminated and how all those pieces are woven together to create a whole, to create something that is bigger than the sum of all its parts. And that's why it's important to tell those stories that we know from a different perspective or point of view, and to tell those stories that are untold. And I would say that even at this late date, there are many stories throughout the national park system that are untold and are usually rooted in gender, class, and race. So we need to just do a better job of amplifying those who have been silent and putting a bigger lens that can capture that wavelength of light that we perceived as being invisible, but we actually have taught ourselves to not see what is actually there. So that is the key thing that is important to resurrecting, to bringing back these stories. These stories were not dead, they were untold. There was a willful, mindful attempt to suppress, to oppress by simply not talking. It is an action. So by when we talk and when we speak, that is an act of defiance, and that is an act of heroism to tell the stories of people who have been silenced through no fault of their own. And that's the power of when you finally have the opportunity to speak for the dead and to tell those stories, which is what I've been doing with the Buffalo Soldier history.
Sheldon, thank you for that. Also, we have on the call Rome. Rome, can you unmute your line and tell us a little bit about some of the studies that you've done regarding the Black families of San Francisco, that many of the stories that Betty's references in her books alludes to?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'll try my best to keep it as short as possible because I know I'm a little long-winded, but just to preface first and foremost, to Ranger Shelton, I've been following him on Instagram forever, and he actually met with some of my fraternity brothers because we hail a longtime military soldier, Colonel Charles Young, who's now Brigadier Charles Young, and he was a part of that Buffalo Soldier commemoration to him. So I've been following Shelton for a long time. But to sort of piggyback on what Ms. Soskin was saying, I've been doing a lot of research because I'm a writer, screenwriter, and film director on a new work called Princes and Pistols. And I read her book, and I read about 4 other books that sort of all kind of coincide what she was talking about in her book. And so this book here, let's see if you guys can see this. It says, oh, wait, there, my equilibrium is off a little bit. Go Do Some Great Thing by Crawford Killian. This book is about some of those same Black families in San Francisco and the greater Bay Area, all the way to Sacramento, that got together in the 1850s and got on a steamship called the Commodore and helped settle what's now known as Victoria, British Columbia. And so when she was talking about some of the passages in her book, and you were kind of chiming in, it made me think of Harriet Tubman. And the only reason why I say that is because Harriet Tubman was alive when Jefferson was alive and also when Reagan was alive, right? And so here, this beautiful, profound woman, Betty Soskin, is alive during a time, almost the same stretch of time, of history and of our situation, and having read those stories in that book I just shared of these families that were in San Francisco in a time where they couldn't prosecute a white person who did, property damage, had no recourse. They were basically helpless during that period. So they all left and got on the steamship and went and helped as settlers. There were early settlers of Canada. They're very popular in Canada, but no one here in the United States even knows that 600 Black San Franciscans left the city and went there and became these great pioneers. I mean, if you read the book, I mean, the Revenant's got nothing on these folks, So I just wanted to share that piece with you guys as an extension to Betty's book as well, because I think it all connects. We're only really 3-4 degrees of separation. And I think that you guys will really find some profound information in that book that really complements Miss Soskin's book as well.
Great, thank you. And the title of the book is Go Do Some Great Thing.
Go
and
do
I
some
think
great thing.
That is definitely what we're aspiring to with all of these stories. In the time that we have left, I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to answer any questions from the audience. But I want to get back to Betty for a moment, because one of the things that I was really thrilled to learn about in your book was the role that you played in the music scene during the 1960s and 70s. In fact, the documentary that I unfortunately am not able to play because my screen's not working for me. You're a beautiful singer and a musician. What was so pivotal or important about your role in the music scene in Berkeley and in San Francisco in the 60s and 70s with regard to the community at the time?
I think that I was born in a state of surprise. I've been going through all that. I began writing music or making up songs because I didn't consider them music back in the late 60s. And they were quite beautiful. I didn't realize they were until recently, when the filmmaker who was going to be doing a book, a film on my family, ran into them and brought them out. I never copyrighted anything. I wrote them for over 15 or 20 years. And when I heard them again some years ago, I realized how lovely they were. That they really had been a way where I was recording the times in which I was living. And one of them was Sign My Name to Freedom, which is the name of my book. And I'd like
in the time that we have left, I hope that we can, first of all, just really show our appreciation for Betty and the wonderful story that she's been able to share with us. Unless anyone has any further questions, I'd love to share one more time why this story is so important. If not for the history of the people in our community that have actually lived through it, this is history that we will otherwise forget. And without our shared history and memory, we run the risk of being doomed to repeat the negative histories of our past. I definitely want to encourage everyone, if you get a chance to get a copy of Betty's book, please read it. Because the lessons that she shares isn't just about her own personal narrative and the events that she witnessed, but the importance of being able to be present in our world today and hopefully share the things that we love and experience with each other in the future. Betty, thank you so much for being with us today. And I really hope that we can have this conversation again before too long. Thank you so much for being with us.
thank you. I really enjoyed everybody.
Everyone, thank you very much for your time today. And please tune in for our book list for next week. Actually, I'm sorry, for next month, when our guest will be Baratunde Thurston, who is the author of the amazing book, How to Be Black. But he's also the host of the PBS documentary series, America Outdoors. And I really look forward to the conversation that we'll have with him. I want to say one last time that author discussions on the Joy Chip Reading Project are made possible thanks to the generous support of the Schleck Family Foundation, the National Geographic Society, and the National Park Service in partnership with Together Outdoors and the University of Wisconsin Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. Again, we will look forward to seeing you again next week, but most importantly, please keep reading. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next month. Bye-bye, everyone.